But my guest this morning is Kem-Laurin Lubin. And Kem-Laurin Lubin is a doctoral candidate at the University of Waterloo in Canada, often referred to as the Canadian MIT. Her research focuses on computational rhetoric, which explores how technology influences communication and decision-making. Kem examines the intersection of emerging technologies, human agency, and the societal impacts of artificial intelligence and data-driven systems, with a strong emphasis on ethics and equity. A key part of her work is the development of ethotic heuristics, a framework designed to ensure that technological systems respect human dignity and accurately represent and characterize the ethos part, open paren, close paren, peoples. Kem's professional background includes leadership roles in design and innovation at global corporations like Blackberry, Siemens, and Autodesk, giving her a unique perspective that bridges academic research and real-world applications. Her forthcoming book, Design Heuristics for Emerging Technologies, AI Data, and Human-Centered Futures, Considerations for the Rights of Women with UWP Books, explores how technology can be designed to empower individuals while addressing broader societal challenges. With her blend of academic expertise and industry experience, Kem is driving important conversations about ethical, human-centered approaches to technology. She is also the founder and executive director of the AI Global South Summit, an organization advancing AI conversations affecting the Global South, the world's global majority. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Reading Circle microphones, Kem-Laurin Lubin. Kem, good morning.
Good morning, Mark, and thank you for this gracious introduction. Do I want to say something before I start? I felt like you were trolling me with the weather because we have boulevards that just covered in little Mount Everest. Just it's that much snow in Canada. But thank you so much for this gracious introduction. Good morning, everyone.
Well, I tell you what, thank you again so much for rising early with me, because I am very aware that, and matter of fact, Kem, years ago, my guests used to come on at 6 o'clock in the morning. And it was over a few years ago that I changed it to 7 o'clock in the morning. So, and then I have guests every now and again who will call in from the West Coast. So it'll be 4 o'clock in the morning there. So I truly appreciate those of you who rise early. However, they do say the early bird catches the worm. And the good news is I do record the shows, so for those who do not rise and join us early, they have the opportunity to go back and listen to my archives. So, again, I am thrilled. There are 3 people who, if they give me a guest, I don't even have to vet them. There's Pam Perry, Nikki Woods, and Dr. Io Sakai. If those 3 women email me, text me, call me, and say, I have somebody for you, you can consider it done. It's just a matter of selecting a date on the calendar. And so Dr. Io Sakai with UWP, with Universal Right Publications, LLC, she told me about you, and I said, it's just a matter of a date, and here we are. So, Kem.
What of Dr. Sakai? She is just brilliant. She's a maestro. This woman, you meet her, and she is electric. If you have the pleasure of meeting her in person, thank you, Dr. Sakai.
Oh, yes, that Mark. She is. As I said, I've known Dr. Io Sakai since 2001. She was one of my first guests when I started the show. This is my 24th year on the air, and she was one of my initial guests when I started interviewing authors. So, as I said, she is in that short list of people that when they recommend a guest to me, I do not have to vet them. I don't have to say, well, what do they like? I don't have to do all that. If they say it, they're in.
The Queen has spoken.
That's absolutely right.
Yes.
So, all right, let's go back. Because like I said, I don't work off of a question list. However, I do kind of begin with kind of like, well, where did it all begin? I mean, and yours is really, we're going to have to do some serious explanations for the listening audience in terms of definitions of these various terms and exactly what you do. But where did that begin? I mean, was this something you were interested in as a child, or were you an avid reader, or were you into science? Were you into technology? What kind of like, where did this start?
All of it. So I was an avid reader. I grew up in the Caribbean, but I was one of these kids who read with the touchlight. We call them touchlights back in the day when mom switched off the lights. Put that away. I would go under the blanket with the book and with my light and the book and just read until, I fell asleep with books. And I've always had somewhat of an interest in technology. Fast forward, I moved to Canada. It's the late 80s. My first job out of a master's program, I got selected out of 249 candidates for a job in New Jersey, which is where I think you're from, Mark. And so that was after completing a master's degree where I studied something called language, rhetoric, and professional writing. Now, it sits under the English department, but it was the inaugural of a program that is now called Digital Arts Communication. And I had interest in the space of systems design. I was a little techie. I was not the kind of English student who appreciated Bronte. I was just like, why am I reading these dead white people? So I say that partially, but I don't mean that with dead people. I was more interested in how do we actually create from here. And so 20 years ago, I had the benefit and the privilege of working for Siemens, and I accidentally fell into a field called user-centered design. I was just a natural at it. It really took a lot of field research and what we call ethnographic research. So I just came fresh out of university in Canada, came the cold, and was in New Jersey speaking to radiologists and medical doctors using Siemens applications. And the big task was, how do we localize German software for an English American market? So fast forward, I was recruited back to Canada by a small, famous company. At that time, it was called Research in Motion, where they hired me to build a usability lab because I had built one for Siemens, along with my peer, Arnold Rutherford, who's now back in Basque Country. But nonetheless, I was recruited and led the first design research team at Blackberry, which was really a thrill back in the day. It was a lot of things happening around mobile. I led the team. It started with about 4 to 6 interns. From there, I grew the team to over 20-something. I can't recall at this point. It's been so long ago.
Right.
But what struck me, it was the beginning where people were talking about such things as instrumentation. How do we take information and data from a piece of software to help inform a decision? And that was all cool. I acquired a couple of patents, etc., had a couple of babies circa about 2009. Around that time, I went to work for a company called, that was after Siemens and, Research in Motion. I went to work for a company called Autodesk. And I think that's where I pivoted towards, going back to school and thinking about doing this degree. And I'll tell you why. At that time, I was leading multiple teams. And so there were writers, there were design researchers, there were UI designers, interaction designers, etc. And it was really also at that time that there was a lot of conversation about, how do we proceduralize software, i.e., how does the software work with minimal interaction with the user if software knows, based on all of this data and this history and this learning, that every time a user touches these 3 buttons, the next sequence of buttons are these 5 other buttons, right? Why do you need a person to design it? And so what was happening alongside that, being a design lead, I was also having to let people go. And so I saw, I think, from the vantage design leader that proceduralization in software means, basically automation. You can call it automation. If I know that the user's next best step is X, why do I need somebody to actually click the button? And you could see where this is going. And it's a conversation I think we don't have enough. Those of us who've worked in corporate spaces, we are the fodder, automating the process for efficiency for the shareholders, but we don't often just take a step back to say what is going on. Now, let me just get to the crux of what's going on. I'll not call names of companies because I don't want to be sued, but there is a general practice, a dark pattern in software development where a company can decide for their software, they will just allow users to opt in to collect data. And so what you have when you have these sorts of dark patterns is that you're removing agency from a user to say, I opt in. And so that justification would be like, well, it's just going to the BRIC countries, just opt them in. They don't care. We'll collect the data so that our machine can learn what it is they're doing, and we'll use that data, even without their agency, to help proceduralize our software. So I let that sit for a bit, and I was sort of a leader in that space, telling my designers, yeah, we're going to, when we design the system, we're going to do these sorts of things. And there was, I think, being a village girl, for me, I was like, this stuff isn't ethical. I don't know. it feels weird. And so, I went on from there telling myself that the next job I took up would be one where I don't want to sit in front of a computer. I want to do something completely different. And so I ventured into that space of digital transformation coaching. I became a design thinking coach. And I really thought having these two perspectives would help me further center the user or the human being in that conversation. But this is not how it works out in reality. When you work in that space, you get your skills as a practicing designer gets usurped by corporate spaces. And then you become part of that machine of how do we take your skill and automate it. And so I did that for a couple of years alongside saying, you know what, I'm going to go back to school. I went back to school. And I knew it was ordained in a way because I thought to myself, how do I work full-time doing this job and go to school? And Mark, you will never guess what happened. The university had one of my classes in the building where I worked. Can you believe that? So I went from school, from work, and at night I would walk down, a short flight of stairs to attend class. It was just mind-boggling. I'm like, how is that possible? So, so I went back, and I was really concerned then with studying the space of human agency in software development. And that's what I went in with. I went in with that focus, and I came out a post-colonial scholar looking at things like marginalization, critical race theory. People don't want to hear that word down in the South, but that's what it is. That's where we're at.
Correct.
So the space that we're in right now is looking at here we are at this really critical posture in human civilization where artificial intelligence is usurping so much of the human's decision-making process. You want a bank loan? Well, AI can compute to you whether or not that person is deserving of a loan or not. You want to get into a job? AI can now look at your CV alongside information it learned from, the analog spaces and the biases that get built into this and say, no, you don't deserve that job. It's characterizing you. And so I was very interested, given my scholarship stance, being in a humanities department and also loving technology to see, okay, what is this software doing rhetorically? How is it computing identity to determine things like guilt or innocence? Now, that's a long way of saying, my studies and my what I think is my passion now is not something I say, let me go study this to get a job. It just grew over time. And in that time, I had published a book earlier in the space of sustainable design. So all of this to me is just a natural trajectory of where I need to be to help mitigate some of the harm that is being done by us being at this critical technological posture in civilization.
Well, what's interesting, as I heard you and I listened to you as you were talking, is I've been on the planet long enough. I've been on the planet since 78 and 45 records were around. And so we're talking, I've been around since 78s and 45s all the way through AI and everything that's come about during those years since 1962 through now. And so we're talking 8-track tapes, we're talking cassette tapes, we're talking MP3s, we're talking iPods, we're talking, the list goes on and on. Whenever I was in high school, my father told me to take a typing course. I had no idea what? Take a typing. I'm a male. Why am I? He said, no, take a typing course. And I did. And we were on those old Selectric typewriters. And I'm saying all this to say how technology over a 50, 60-year period of time has changed so much. I remember I was at AT&T when we were introduced to the personal desktop, and I was sitting there like, why do I need this? And then I learned how to do it. And then email came out, and I was like, email? What? Email? We've been around to see all these things introduced all the way through AI. Now, if you're not technologically, I really feel sorry for my peers and folks who are not technologically savvy, because when a lot of this stuff was coming out, I was in my 20s, so I was kind of grasping onto it. But there are a lot of folks who are older that just could not make heads or tails of how to do these things. I mean, when I was in college, what we took was COBOL, and that was back there with the old punch cards. So you get one thing wrong, your whole deck was off.
Yes.
So, I mean, these are all the changes that rapidly have come about. And you're talking about now on the back end. You're talking about on the programming end, on the coding end, on the software design end. So I'm talking about on the final product side, what we get. You're on the back end. You're on the other side of that, making that happen. What is that like?
I went to the mountaintop, and I've seen what's happening back then. I could tell you a lot of it is smokes and mirrors, but let me just pause a bit. So you made a very interesting point I want to unpack a bit. You said, so much has changed over the years with technology. I won't say how old I am. I am young. I'm young. I'm old and young.
I know that's right. Same here.
That's right. And so, I think one of the things we should be cognizant of is that while all of these technology has evolved and, changed and morphed, it's also changing us, right? It's changing how
Correct.
we exist in the space. And so as a human-centered design practitioner, I don't dub myself that as much anymore. I am a design activist. That's broadly how I see myself. And so we need to be cognizant that, technology and AI is becoming so central to our daily lives with no consideration for those of us who are Luddites or Luddite-leaning, if you know what I mean. And so there's some of us who don't want to use technology,
right.
Whether it's your father who may need to fill out a prescription online. It's like, I don't want to do that. I just want to be able to call the pharmacist.
That's right.
Done. And so we need to be cognizant of that and respectful that we are now being sucked into this machine where thou shalt now use technology. And so the kind of work I do also subsumes conversations around Luddites and Luddism, and those of us who are just not ready, because what it is doing, it is leaving a large swath of society as marginalized to technological spaces. When was the last time you actually touched money, right?
Absolutely. Now, I do not carry cash, which is probably a bad practice, but you're absolutely right.
Yes. And so for me, when I think of the work I do, while I look at it from the stance of having practiced as a design researcher, I also look at it as through the lens of human centricity. And the humans, it's a whole range of people. My dad doesn't know how to scroll, for example.
Right.
So whatever's happening in the world right now is not my dad. So, So back to your question about the back end of it, I think I've had the privilege of being in spaces where a lot of folks, and that's why I feel so qualified to write this book, I bring tangible, visceral practice and knowing that this is what is happening. And so I want to go to the word heuristic. The idea of heuristics is not new in the design space. It's been around for ages. If you're a practicing designer and you practice on a user interface, there's certain heuristics like allow the user to recover from error, regarding certain placement of things. So there were 10 heuristics at the time that was actually devised by Rolf and Jacob Nielsen. And so these were up to, I want to say, just a decade ago, the mainstay of design practice. And so I wanted to build on the legacy of the practice and acceptance of heuristics as a guiding principle for designers who are looking at a user interface and saying, yep, we've done these 10 things. So this is now looking at the back end to some extent to say, when we are now designing systems that have been trained to compute data to characterize a human being, to say, well, this person is deserving or not, this is a 1 or a 0, these are the kinds of heuristics that we need to be privy of. And that is basically the underlying argument that I make in my doctoral thesis as well, too. I look at it not only in the space of just general heuristics, but I say, okay, how does that apply and change in the context of healthcare data? How does that apply in the context of text, and I use the word text broadly, of course, that justifies surveillance practices like law enforcement PSAs that tell us we need a facial recognition software because, how does that apply in these spaces? So I use the whole concept of heuristics across my thesis to help interrogate these spaces in their specific context. And so, for example, who knows, down the road, I might write a heuristic around, something else, the Global South. How does heuristics in design mitigate biases for those in the Global South, the brown and the black bodies that exist in the Global South? So yeah, I hope that has answered the question. I don't know, but
no, because it is a conversation. There are no right or wrong answers. This is a conversation in terms of, and because one of the things I love about this show is I have the opportunity to inform, educate, entertain, all of the above, and then some. And many of my guests, and now you're one of them, really are on here and you debunk myths, because I'm going to shift gears a tiny bit and we're still going to stay in topic in terms of you being an African-American Caribbean woman in this field. Are there many women that do what you do, or when you went into it, were there many women that do what you do?
No, that was actually, so let me just step back. You know, as a Caribbean Black woman, somebody born in the Caribbean, I've always been the center. I never said, you know, oh, I was Black. I was just a Caribbean woman. And when I came to Canada in the late 80s, I remember being at a mall, Bayview, whatever it was called, in Ottawa. And somebody said, oh, that Black woman over there. And I was just like, what is she talking about?
Uh-huh.
And so I'm sure this is stories that you've heard before, whether it's people from Africa or the Caribbean. And so I think I led a kind of at the earlier phases of my life in Canada in corporate, I was very much a kind of a Pollyanna.
Correct.
And I say that because I was not yet aware of the deep histories of Blacks in North America, be it Canada, Nova Scotia, or the U.S. And so as I grew into this space and I absorbed a lot of that, I was working in the U.S. and I remember applied for a condo, and the white gentleman said to me, you speak so well. And I was like, thank you.
Boy.
And a few years later, somebody said, no, girl, that meant that you're not supposed to speak that well.
That is correct.
I remember going to the dentist in Princeton, and he said to me, your teeth are so beautiful. And, you know, they're so, like, you have no cavities. And I said, well, because I go to the dentist. And it's like,
correct.
I can afford that. So, and the conversation just was really over my head. And so I remember also going to conferences and being the only Black person in a sea of
correct.
White faces. I worked for German companies. So for me, at some level, I hadn't computed that was abnormal. And I came across, if you're listening, April McGee, a shout out to another sister from New Jersey. She was the first Black woman that I met in design 3 years in. And I was just like stunned. I was stunned. There was another Black gentleman who also avoided me. And I thought, and somebody explained, no, we don't congregate down here. You know, like we don't want to be together like that.
Mm.
So I had weird experiences in the U.S. That I would say, again, I was very much a Pollyanna. Now, when I came back to Canada, it was also very uncommon, and it's something that I reflect on now, to be a Black woman leading teams with a lot of white men. And so at Autodesk, I think I led a team with at least 27 white men who were my age and older. And I think coming to these spaces with that level of ignorance was a curse and a curse and a gift in some ways. But no, it wasn't until I want to say the last 3-4 years I've seen a lot of Black designer types, and even then, and they're not even staying in the space that long. But it was a very lonely journey as a practitioner in the space. I think the closest that I got to seeing other Black brown bodies were maybe my Indian colleagues when that was a thing in the mid 2000s. But
right.
Other than that, no. Pollyanna to now design a post-colonial decolonizing activist. That's why I'm right now. You've heard it here first.
No, see, and it's interesting as you gave that description and depiction and your experiences, because I've had the same ones. Matter of fact, when I was going through undergrad, I was the only one my undergrad was in business administration. For a long time, I'd be the only Black in the class. And it's the same thing, you know, as I went through various degrees, as well as whenever I worked in corporate America, most of the time I was the only African American in a group. And yes, that I laugh whenever you said that commentary, because that's a backhanded compliment. It's a compliment in a sense, but at the same time, what they're saying is, one, we don't expect it out of you. And secondly, I've been told you're not like the rest. And I had to push back and say, yes, I am. And so the fact that you speak, well, why would you not expect me to be articulate, or why would you not expect me to speak well or to carry myself well? And so when I walk into any room, I'm going in there with the attitude that I'm the prize. When I walk in there, I'm top notch. I'm walking in. So I'm like, I don't allow anyone to try to diminish me in terms of where I'm from or the color of my skin, this, that, and the other. But I asked that question specifically for a reason, because you're debunking myths, or you are part of those who debunk myths because, first off, they think women can't do it. Secondly, they think particularly black women can't do it. So, or it's not expected to be done. So the fact that you're doing it, and not only doing it, but doing it well and going on and getting a doctorate in it. I mean, that's why I asked that question. So now when you start, I'm looking here in the bio where it says, technology systems that respect dignity and accurately represent and characterize people's. And you were talking a little bit about that, like the decisions were being made for healthcare and all that kind of stuff with AI. I find it interesting that AI is called artificial intelligence because in some respects, sometimes the artificial intelligence is more intelligent than the real intelligence.
Absolutely, absolutely. Mark, let me just give kudos. Let me put you all on game here. For some of the women rocking it in other disciplines, doing, I wouldn't say what I'm doing, but relatively similar things. So there's Dr. Joy William-Winney out of MIT, the American Justice League. She's looking at that through the space of, a book on masking, for example. Elsewhere, Dr. Safia Noble, Algorithms of Oppression. She's doing that from a vantage point in communications. I had the pleasure of interviewing her here in Canada, virtually, of course, during COVID. Check her out. And one of my other favorites who I also see as a kind of a mentor in my head, Dr. Ruha Benjamin out of Princeton. There are other Black women rocking it in their spaces. But I think in terms of folks in my space, I forgot as well to Dr. Leslie Noel, who is now, the dean at OCAD. She's rocking it in her space. But I'm not somebody to speak with any degree of arrogance, but nobody's doing what I'm doing. This book is a first in class. It's very similar to my old book, User Experience in the Age of Sustainability, in 2011, when nobody was writing about, the impact of materialization in mobile and what that means for those of us in the global south, or what it means for the planet. So, yes.
No, and it's not, because this is Black History Month. Now, for me and for most, there is no such thing as just 1 month. Black history is every day. And then when you have this so-called leader that's up there talking about we don't have Black History Month, and I don't need anybody to tell me or not tell me when is Black History Month, this, that, and the other. I celebrate my Blackness daily.
Daily,
so,
yes, that's right.
I'm saying, again, all of that to say, and for listening audience, if you don't know who you're listening to, this is your host, Marc Medley. You're listening to The Reading Circle, and my special guest this morning is Kem-Laurin Lubin. And we're going deep because she's into technology. And there's many of my questions I'm asking based on my experiences with technology. These phones, and it's funny, when I saw Blackberry, I remember when Blackberry was introduced. I mean, this was prior to all, back to you were talking about what technology can do. I mean, going back to 8-track tapes, I remember carrying these big boxes in my car with all these big tapes. And now on these mobile phones, we can have thousands of songs.
Yes.
With the mobile phone, I mean, again, we're talking artificial intelligence. I am convinced that this Apple phone that I have, whatever, even what I'm saying right now, it's processing that information and it's deciding what's going to pop up next. I mean, I have been in stores and now all of a sudden, whenever I go home, I'm now not receiving, and I haven't done anything with the phone other than it was on me. And now I start receiving ads from that particular store. So then I've had conversations. Even my playlist is popping up is based on other things that I've accessed. So there's a whole lot of information and data these various devices are capturing from us. Even like I have Alexa in my home and I tell it what to do. But even they're listening to us.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's very terrifying. I had a similar experience in 2017 when I was just sitting in my living room, my kids and my partner. My partner was talking about, what are we going to do? Like, where are we going to go on vacation? We should go to Italy. I was there 23 years ago. I actually worked in Italy. I have a friend listening who worked with me in Italy 23 years ago. So that was that. I put my phone away. I came back and I had recommendations of where to stay in Italy. And I'm like, this is bloody terrifying. I don't bring my phone to my bedroom. That is just too invasive. And so, yes, and that is to some extent a form of characterization. Your phone is listening to you or looking at what you did online, and you've selected a pair of green shoes 2 months ago, and these green shoes follow you around. And you're like, why are these shoes following me? It's because, of course, the data systems are learning that you like green shoes, cat, and Italy. And so that's what you keep on giving. And so people need to recognize as well, too, that, the decisions that it's goading you towards is based on historical data. You've moved on, but this data is there. And to that sense, it is highly artificial. I also use the analogy of making cake with artificial vanilla versus real vanilla, right? Analog versus digital. And so I think we need to be cognizant of we've given so much power to artificial AI-powered decision-making systems, and we are here letting it take over and usurp our humanity. And so I think that's where I sit in terms of, how do we, a couple of things. I often wonder, how do I actually mobilize that into research to tell the average citizen that, the thing you're doing on your phone is actually tracking you and your decisions are no longer your own. You're making these decisions because of X. And the terrifying thing is that a lot of these big tech bros are now in the pocket of politicians who really don't understand the implications for civilization, for their citizens, when they actually, allow these things to happen. So
no, you're absolutely right, because and I'm glad you went there, because that's where I want to go in terms of, first off, the general public, we are just becoming aware of AI. I remember with the internet has been around for years. It just recently was introduced to the general public. Now, how long has AI been around? Because it was just released to the public over the last couple of years. That don't mean it's just getting here. That means it's been out there for years.
Absolutely. AI we call it AI now, but it is really it's changed posture, right? So when it started years ago, of course, it might have been things like, how do we measure a face and dimensions of a face from the distance of the mouth to the nose to the eye to discern that this is a human versus a dog versus a gorilla versus a rabbit, right? So the whole idea around AI is that the way I reduce it from people in my circle is that, look, it's a bunch of data tables that are being computed to see whether it matches whether or not something that it's learned in the past to say, okay, this is a human being, this is a dog, this is a cat. And if you've ever watched a show called Silicon Valley, there's a really funny episode where this guy's training the AI machine for their shareholders who are completely ignorant, of course. And all he's doing is, hot dog, not hot dog, hot dog, not hot dog, right? And so in many ways, when you look at the strand of AI, i.e. machine learning, that's learning. And I'll give you another example that we should be cognizant of. Imagine that we are now porting over the skills of teaching AI in the realm of medicine to say whether or not somebody has skin cancer. What if that AI agent has only learned from white skins? How might it detect cancer on a black skin? We don't think about these use cases. And so it is now made a computation to say, that dark skin doesn't have cancer because we've never encountered it before. And so we need to, and this is the kind of work that folks like Joy Buolamwini has been doing, because in her case, when she put her face in front of the computer, it said, no, that is not a woman. That is not a human. It might be an animal because it hasn't created our phenotypical differences as Black people to know that we have different face structures, we have different dimensions, and all of these things. And so the way these big tech bros try to mitigate it is that they will perhaps use the same white base data and color it different shades of brown, but you've not addressed the problem. You need to go in the field to get the data from the people, the actual people, and not create this synthetic Black person because you just colored it brown. Now the system can learn. So the work that herself and folks like Timothy DeBrew have done is to actually provide, a swath of data that actually subsumes, say, for example, Africa, because different typical features, different colors, etc., very similar to the Shirley card. If you can remember back in the day, if you have old pictures from the 70s, we all look weird in these pictures next to white people because the baseline was always some girl named Shirley, a pale-skinned woman named Shirley. And so we were trying to align to that ideal and standard of appropriate visual of take a picture. Right? So it's the same in software, is that a lot of the software is learning from data that does not belong to the population that it's supposed to represent.
Now, that was definitely an interesting insight. That's something I really had not thought about in terms of the example like you just gave about not being able to detect dark skin or African-American features or what have you. Now, that's scary only because, if prior to the technology we had racism and prejudice and everything else, prior to the technology, there is nothing to say that it can't be built into the technology.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you think, the one example I have given people is that, remember when you did your taxes on paper?
Correct.
And then fast forward a few years, you're now doing your taxes in an app. They're basically taking the same paper information and digitizing it, right? And adding some computation so things are automated. You can, there's an internal calculator that calculates things. When you think about jurisprudence and the kinds of documents that existed on surveillance, on surveilling black bodies, these are all just automated in digital spaces. And so when I think about, how do we actually mitigate porting over analog biases into digital spaces? This is where a book like, Design Heuristics for Emerging Technologies comes in to say, how we consider these things. Now, a scary part that probably applies more in the U.S. is that, we could use now data from, where you live, your last name, lots of other things like where your biometric data was captured, and make an assessment that you come from X type of neighborhood, and therefore, when we compute you, the likelihood of guilt versus innocence is high. And so, therefore, perhaps you're a guilty person. And so we have to be very on game in understanding that is the degree of computation that somebody decided that, will help us manage millions of people. We don't have to have humans. We can just have the computer do it without human oversight. So that these are a lot of use cases that we need to, as a collective, as citizens, be aware of in what is being tracked and how that may be used down the road to compute and characterize it.
You brought up a very different point as I was listening to you in terms of applying for jobs. We walk in there with our CVs, our resumes on paper. We hand that in, our portfolio, this, that, and the other. And the person that's doing the hiring, that's cute. That's nice for them. But based on what you just said, all they got to do is go into the computer and get all the biometrics and everything else. And that's what they're going to make the decision on. So it really doesn't matter what your CV says. It doesn't matter what your resume says. It doesn't matter what you say when you're sitting behind that desk. The decision is going to be made by something that don't really know you as a human being.
Well, Mark, it's already happened with Amazon. A few years ago, Amazon's hiring practice, because everything is done online, omitted many women and women from certain universities. And so when that was found out, of course, they correct their proprietary AI. That's what they call it. It's our IP. We want to see what the hell is in the box. And so, that is already happening writ large. So we need to be aware of that. I want to know. So I think of the kind of tools that I would love to create is that if you're a lawyer and you're in court, and you're saying, well, my client has been affected. The material outcome is this based on some computation. I want to be able to understand what was happening in that black IP box that you call your AI proprietary data. And so, this is what I am focused on in this case to say all of these fertility apps that, especially with the backdrop of Roe v. Wade being reversed, right? And now my data is now being used potentially to prosecute me in states where abortion is now illegal. Like, I want to know how you computed that stuff. Like, are you listening to my text? Are you giving me the opportunity to actually the opportunity for you to take my data? Did you get consent? And all of these things. So when you're building these systems, what I'm saying is that there needs to be a check that centers the human and the potential mishaps of negative material outcomes because of something AI computed with no human oversight. And now my client is in jail in Kentucky because she said to her mom on Facebook she was going to have an abortion. By the way, this has already happened.
Wow, because I'm noticing that the second part of your title is Considerations for the Rights of Women. Yes.
So I honestly thought of writing a broader book to think, this is just for human-centered futures. But there's a reason for this, is that chapter 2 of my thesis, which is already now published with Taylor and Francis as in a journal, Sex After Technology, an homage, of course, to Dr. Benjamin, really focuses on women's data and what is happening with Roe v. Wade being reversed, and how, when you think about it, a lot of women, just naively puts their information on apps to track their periods, to track their fertility. without thinking, okay, now Roe v. Wade is reversed. Can they use that data if they knew I was pregnant in January and no baby arrived? So there are lots of weird use cases that have emerged at the intersection of politics and human rights, civil liberties, that as the average citizen, we do not see them until they're staring us in the face. And that is especially why I wanted to make this consideration for the rights of women. I think we can remove consideration for the rights of women and have it consideration for the rights of humans. But this was very near and dear to me, as it really resonated with the work that I was doing for my dissertation.
No, absolutely right. Now, the next question would be, because AI, like anything else, is not perfect. And I had this discussion in one of my classes with one of my professors, and they're like, AI doesn't always get it right. Matter of fact, what AI will do, kind of like it'll pull information from various places. Matter of fact, sometimes it'll whatever you put in there for AI to do, it just spits the same thing back at you. In a sense, it almost will give you what you want to hear. And if you don't go back in there and really kind of say, wait a minute, let me see if this makes sense. AI can be wrong. So what happens when AI is wrong on some of these scenarios that you've discussed?
Well, let me give you a fun one before I give you one that I discussed. Online purchasing of a car. I know there's a car company or a vehicle company in Pennsylvania, I think it was, that just said, yeah, you know what, we're going to fire a few salesmen. AI can sell the car online. AI sold that car for $1, and they had to sell it to the person for $1, right? No
That's right.
That always gets me when I hear that. But to your point, like, what are some of the cases? So many things. So I'll speak specifically of Gen AI and a tool like ChatGPT that maybe the audience is more familiar with. So I taught a class not last week, winter 2023, and it was just at the point where some of my students I could see were using AI. I'm like, everybody's using the word delve. Why is everybody delving? Everybody's navigating intricate tapestries. Like, why is everybody navigating intricate tapestries, right? And so AI, what it has done is actually learned, especially ChatGPT, from what we call good English. And I've written about this, that, what is considered good academic English has actually been its downfall in some ways when people read a piece and they're like, yeah, that's a ChatGPT piece. And so what AI does is, what you put in is what you get out. If this is what you put into the AI, the training of AI, including Wikipedia and all the stuff that you script online, that's what you're going to get back.
Correct.
So we have to be human beings, citizens. Please wake up. We need to stop being goaded by the system. We need to stop being cattle for the system. And so I say all this to say that AI is not a magic wand. It's not the panacea for all that ails us. There is a kind of a dying confidence in people who use AI because they've used it so much. They question themselves and their humanity and their linguistic skills because AI says it a certain way, right? And so, yes, AI sometimes hallucinates. I had my students actually, as a class exercise, generate a horror story. I wrote about it online. But I did that really not to say don't use AI, but to show them and have them immersed in an activity where they were doing an assessment of what AI spat out. And I was pleased to say only one student submitted a ChatGPT paper at the end of the semester because they knew through the class exercises during that assessment of AI-produced text that it wasn't what they would write, right? And so these are some of the cases that people will say, oh, AI, ChatGPT, please generate a letter to whoever and send. And so that is a practice I think people need to stop doing. I sometimes use AI, but what I do from ChatGPT is that I dictate what it is I want to say. I dictate it with my own voice, so there's an essence of me in it. I might say, please edit for grammar, right? So, yes, we need to be cognizant that what we're getting out of this ChatGPT is making us all the same. We're all delving. We're all, navigating tapestries. And I was on YouTube just the other day, and this girl who really shouldn't be using the word delve for what she was presenting, she was delving every 2 minutes. And I'm like, this girl is definitely writing AI scripts. And so we can tell. There are lots of people who could tell that, We did not delve, 5 years ago, but we're all delving.
Well, it's like there are now. It's funny you bring that up because there are certain words in AI that are like nuance is one. Nuance is every time anything that you pull up in AI, the word nuance is in there somewhere. But this is my thing with AI and any other tool for that matter, any other resource. It's like, again, when I was a kid, calculators were introduced. Prior to calculators being introduced, you had to do it on scrap paper and in your head. The problem, and as a teacher, we had was, all right, it's one thing to know how to do it on paper in your head, and then you use the calculator as a tool, compared with you don't know how to do it on paper and in your head, and you immediately go straight to the calculator. So I'm saying all that to say, for me, AI is my friend because I already know how to write. I already know how to speak. So whenever I go to AI, if I want to pull something out of there, I may, put a subject in there, and then I'll take it and, let it frame, and then I put it in my own words. Okay, that gave me an idea. That jump-started a thought or something. But as far as just pulling a document that AI wrote and turning that in, I can remember because when I'm not doing radio, my day job is principal of a school. I was a teacher. So in terms, and I'm going to ask you a question about that in a couple of minutes, in terms of children doing what you do or thinking like you think, I'm going to ask you that in a minute. But in any event, I remember when the internet came out, a child actually went to Google, pulled down all the research information and came to me and said, okay, here's my research paper, here's my paper, here's my book report. I said, that's not your book report, that's your research. But the kid was thinking, all I got to do is pop something into Google, whatever prints out, that's what I'm going to submit. There are people doing the same thing with AI, that whatever I get from AI, that's what I'm going to submit. Because like I said, I don't have a problem with AI because I already know how to write. I already know how to read. I already know how to talk. So using AI is just a resource. But there are people that are totally reliant on it. And back to what we were saying, when you start seeing words like delve and nuance and all, like, okay, you didn't write that.
Yes. And not to troll your government, but I'm very well aware that some of your policies are being AI generated.
Correct.
So who has time down the road? So let's just generate a policy for immigration.
Right. And see, that's where it gets scary because, again, AI, one, will tell you what you want to tell it. Secondly, it can be wrong.
Absolutely. I'll give you another example that, which is why I thought of writing this. So I am what they call French Creole, and I say that with air quotes. I say French Creole because I'm from, an island that has had a very strong French history. Now, there's also French Creole in Louisiana. And 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, I gave AI the task of, generate me some images. I was doing this little sketchy thing for some kid stuff of Creole women. And what came up were these Creole Louisiana women. I'm like, what the hell? That's not what I was expecting. So now you have to go back into the AI training system to differentiate between, Antillean Creole and Louisianan Creole and to have context. So what AI also misses a lot of times is context, right? It doesn't know from what perspective you're coming from. And that's why you're seeing a lot of businesses now springing up to say that this AI has been trained on X kind of data or Y kind of data, and that Y itself is the context, right? Construction data or insurance data. So the AI is now being removed from, say, the ChatGPT general use of generative AI to a more specific context. So that is one of the things that we're seeing rising businesses in that space where people are saying, now my AI focuses on just giving insurance data, or it gives it borrows from the ecosystem of its linguistic container, but it's still a container.
Wow. So the question I was going to ask in terms, because I was in a principals meeting yesterday, once a month, the principals meet with the superintendent. And one of the things that came out of that meeting yesterday, the science department did a presentation on science. And what they were talking about was how do we get kids to act and think scientifically? It's not just a matter of them reading about something, but how do I get kids in my school to think like you thought as a child? How do I get them to view science in a lens that would make them interested in becoming a scientist or what you do?
That is a hard one, right? Because times have changed.
Correct.
I think there needs to be an innate curiosity about our world. I think technology has changed us so much that many of us think that the answer is always in that box. We do not often take the time to walk out into the forest or to, look at the ocean and to all these things. We're all buried in our phone. And so I think early guidance in terms of critical thinking, exploration. I mean, I come from a generation where I had to learn to cut a frog for biology exams. Like, I'm still traumatized by that. But, I think we need to throw kids into this very context to touch the real world of this reality of our existence, and not to assume that all of the answers are here. And I feel that is one of the things we need to do better as educators, is to submerge kids in real spaces. And the whole idea of science now is now so implicated in that machine. If you think science, let me go to the computer. Science is out there in nature. Opportunities for all of the kinds of things that I do out there in nature. So why am I interested in things like sustainability and the climate? Is because I grew up in the global south. I could see that in the case of something that we didn't have a way to recycle the waste of the material west, right? And so I was interested in that, which led me to working at Blackberry, which led me to working in technology, and now looking at it from an activist perspective. How do I stop it? How do I mitigate it? So, throw them out there in the forest. They'll figure it out.
Well, you know what? It's interesting because it's almost like you were in the meeting yesterday, because that's exactly what the presenter was saying, exactly what you said in terms of, hands-on projects, actually getting them out there in the environment, so forth and so on, not just the technology, not just the book. So it's almost like you were sitting next to me in that meeting yesterday. And interesting what you were saying. Now, I remember listening to Robert F. Smith, and he is an African-American billionaire. He's the chairperson of Vista Equity Partners, LLC. And what he said was the greatest gift we can give our kids was to give them the ability of figure out ability. In other words, let them figure it out. Something like you were just saying, right? Don't give them the answer. Don't coddle them. Don't let them struggle. Let them figure it out. If there's a problem, and I get kids all the time, well, it's hard. Yeah, it's supposed to be challenging. That's exactly what it's supposed to be. Figure it out. That's one of the best things that we could give kids, back to the critical thinking you were just talking about, is help them to understand you've got to figure it out.
Yes, they need to drink from the water hose a bit. I'm a latchkey generation, so a lot of stuff I had to figure out. At 9, I was making soups for my siblings and myself. We are just a different generation. But I think there are ways we can actually teach this to the younger generation, and it's one of the conversations I have been having with my business partners. How do we create opportunities for kids of this generation to thrive and survive? Because there is a doom and gloom, a desperation, full of despair, because they know nothing else. I think of my kids; they can't survive without their phone.
Right.
A punishment is shut off the Wi-Fi.
That's right.
So they'll figure it out. When I shut the Wi-Fi off, they're like, "I'm going for a walk." That's how they sound in my head, and I'm like, "Oh, there you go." Leave your phone on the table, go for a walk, see you in an hour.
That's absolutely right. But the figure that is critical. I have my staff meeting on March the 5th with my team, with my teaching team, because I'm the principal, and on the agenda is this whole notion of critical thinking. I'm doing a whole section on how to help kids think critical. As I go from class to class, I tell the students, you're not just here to learn information to regurgitate. We're trying to help you think critical, to critically think. Mm-hmm. Yesterday, I had a situation where one of the necklaces that I wear, it popped. Whenever I made the mistake of grabbing it in the wrong place, and it popped. So I have this little kit that you can, repair. But all the little clasp was too big for the hole in the chain. And I'm sitting there, I'm trying to refit it, the one that was in there. And finally, it dropped and I couldn't find it anymore. Now I didn't have any clasps that would fit the size of the hole in the chain. But what I did have, though, was like on the earring, the little thin, like when you put an earring on, I did have that in there. I said, you know what? I could shape a clasp from that. And I took that, and sure enough, the pinpoint was small enough to get through the hole in the chain. I cut part of it, took the pliers, and what dawned on me, I'm sharing this story because I was like, wow, I figured it out. I sat there and figured out how I can put another clasp on this chain, even though I didn't have a clasp because I had lost the one that was originally on there. And what came to me was like, if I can get my kids to do that, if I can get my kids to look at a problem and say, okay, how do I figure this out based on what I have?
Yes. And that is a challenge, right? So not to take it in that direction, but it also draws us back to the conversation around artificial intelligence.
Yes,
we have ported or allowed technology to use up so much of our human specializations and
correct.
is that we have not learned how to fend for ourselves, right?
Correct.
I can go in so many directions with this conversation, but human beings, we're lazy. We're lazy. And there are generations of us who've had to, who fed off the brows of others.
Yes.
Now, many of us are feeding off the brows of artificial intelligence.
Yes.
Without realizing that, there's a reason they call it artificial. It isn't the real thing, folks.
Correct.
So, so critical thinking, and I'm happy I'm actually on general assignment for a course on social media at the University of Waterloo this semester. And all of the exams were in an exam booklet. I'm reading chicken scratch in some cases because I'm like, what is he saying? What is this student saying? There was a pleasure in actually evaluating the papers in that visceral way, right? It was tiring going through 63 papers, but I think for classes, we need to have classes on letterism at this point. We need to have classes where there are no computers.
Right.
You're going to use an exam booklet. You're going to learn how to write.
Right.
Or not. And so that should be a foundational. It is actually a kind of a mental health thing at this point for students.
I could not agree with you. I could not agree with you more. I could not agree with you more.
Yes. Handwritten exams.
Yes.
I'm not saying bring that back, but at least make that foundational to education and learning for students so that by the time you've actually gone through that and you're an adult, you use ChatGPT if you want to, but at least you have that foundation of knowing that you are the overseer of that experience and not ChatGPT.
Correct. That's what I was saying when I gave my calculator example. You're absolutely right. Yes. It's one thing, and I'm going to say it again, like I said earlier, it's one thing to know how to compute without the calculator and use the calculator as a tool. It's another thing to not know how to compute and you rely solely on that calculator to compute for you. That's where, to me, that's where I think we are with AI. So my last question before we wrap up is, all right, where is this going? Are we going to be overtaken by that? I mean, because this is 2025. What are we talking about in 2030, 2035, 2050? What are we talking here? Because if we're at this point now, where are we going?
I ask the same questions, and it's very terrifying. We know of the potentials of the dangers of all of the servers that we have, warming our climate, whether or not you believe that or not, that's what's happening. This heat isn't going elsewhere. And some of the questions that I have is, to what end? Why are we collecting all this data? Where are we going? And I think that because a lot of this is really implicated in capitalistic ventures, we are going to see lots of that. We're going to see our data being commodified, reified, our experiences. Nature is going to live in a box called your computer. We need to be, as a society, be aware that we are the product. We are the raw materials that are actually being reified and datafied and computed for the benefit of the big tech bros. And we need to, as a collective, once we have that knowledge, figure out how we mitigate that. Now, I'm not somebody who says I hate AI. There's some positives around AI. AI can do things like, help, detect skin cancer. AI could do things like help detect fires and lots of wonderful things, right? But we need to be aware that it is not a magic pill for everything. It is not a panacea for all that ails us. At some point, we need to turn the TV off. You know what I mean?
I do.
Yes. So turn the computer off, go outside, explore the spaces in which we live. I live on a street in the days where I don't see any of my neighbors and my neighbors' kids. I said to my son, did the kids move? They're still inside. They're probably on the computer. And so where are we going? We need to, as a collective, figure out what future we want to live in, because I can tell you that the way it's going, it's a dystopia for many of us and a utopia for the 1%. So we need to get on the activist train around technology to protect the futures. I speak to a friend very, very frequently who's very concerned that her adult children are going to move back in with her because with the speed of automation and how AI is taking over so much, a lot of people are out of work. Where did they go back? We are now seeing data where we have a growing multi-generational household here in Canada. Just kids were boomeranging back home because that job they had, which has now been automated and which now AI does, they cannot do. They cannot compete with that. Now, I do believe that in the further future, we'll figure out, what does the future of work look like for humanity? But, I ask the same questions, Mark, where are we going? So to that end, the kinds of heuristic that I look at are things that actually help safeguard our humanity. How do we actually safeguard human-centered futures? I just happen to be focused on women in this case, but we should all walk around with our eyes peeled. We are the product.
All right. Well, believe it or not, the time goes. Anytime when I talk to my guests, when they say, how long are we going to be on? I usually say, we'll be on about an hour or a few minutes after. What are we going to talk about for that long? Oh, it goes by very quickly. And then an hour has gone by. And what I do for the last 5 minutes is to allow my guests to promote and to shout out. And I know your book is coming up on Universal Right Publications and with Dr. Ayo Sakai. I mean, anybody you want to shout out or any, guest appearances, any books, anything the only thing you cannot say is a dollar amount. That's the only thing you cannot say is a cost or a dollar amount.
That,
but anything short of that, I'm going to turn the mic off for the next few minutes and you get a chance to do your thing. Promote as much as you'd like.
Okay, so shout out, of course, to Dr. Ayo Sakai. So we met last year accidentally. We basically ran into each other, and she, for me, has been the maestro of, me telling my truth and telling my stories, coming out of a space in the corporate world where I always felt a certain degree of fear in not saying, the wrong things. So I feel very empowered in really relaying the stories of, data and women and humans and how we can help mitigate that. So that is what this book is all about. The book generally is in 2 parts. So there's a lot of course, theory, given, of course, some of the requirements around universal right publications. And this being a book that is going to be a practitioner's book. And so I was very cognizant as well, too, of making sure that we promote not only those that we have traditionally promoted in tech, whether it is in my work cited. So there's a lot of rich authorship that actually informs my work. Folks like, of course, Ruha Benjamin, shout out, Noble, William Winnie, and others, as well as Dr. Sakai's work in language and the imperialism of language itself. So So the book is actually going to be a birthday present for me this year. My birthday is May 13th. Do send gifts, folks. But the book is coming out May 15th, and I'm very excited about that. To what end? Where am I going with this book? I hope this book becomes a textbook. That is, of course, my every writer's dream is that the book becomes a text. I think it is going to be a text for the times in terms of allowing people to see what is happening with anecdotes and examples in the first part of the book. And, how do we combat that, for example? How do we combat where we don't see women or user consent in a user interface or in a system that is being designed and AI powered? So many shout outs to give. A lot of the shout outs actually perhaps go to my supervisors as well, to Dr. Randy Harris, who I actually started a course with 20 years ago, which drew me back to completing this doctoral degree at the university. And what got me started as a course was something called the metaphors of computing. And it's very unique to the University of Waterloo, where we have courses that intersect the space of technology and art. And so going back to this degree, I was surprised he was still there and was thrilled to have him as my supervisor. Dr. Lai Chi-Fan, who is my secondary supervisor in the space of sociology. She's also very instrumental in looking at the impact of artificial intelligence and things like smart cities. So shout out to her as well, too. Shout out to my family, as well as to my partner, Stefan, who's been so gracious in taking out my dog so he wouldn't be barking outside the door the entire time. And I know it's early. So, folks, do look out for this book. Let me just take a pause, Mark, to say that for those of us in Canada, many of us do not know that Alberta, the province of Alberta, is investing $70 million in data centers. This gives me pause. It terrifies me because what I see is a slow walk towards digital citizenship management, because I ask myself, whose data is actually going to the data servers? It's our data. We need to be mindful of what's happening. We also need to be mindful of the indigenous communities who are actually saying to these investors, including some guy from Shark Tank, I know it's not going to go well, knowing that there's a guy from Shark Tank. But anyway, we need to be cognizant of how we're impacting people's lives when we think about building data centers that are warming up the climate. So all of that, shout out to the indigenous community in Canada as well, too. So I don't think I have any more shout-outs, Max. That's about it. And to my friends who all tuned in, I was in contact with a few of you this morning. Shout out. Let's go get this. Let's stay woke about AI and what it is doing. Keep in mind that while technology is helping us, it is also changing us. So let's just be mindful of that. That's all.
Well, again, I thank you so much for joining me this morning. Fascinating.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you. You're welcome. Fascinating and enlightening conversation, thought-provoking, as it ought to have been. And for those of you who tuned in and for those who will be listening on the recording, it is something to think about. I heard you say the digital, how did you say that in terms of, like, in other words, we're going to be taken over by the digital. I forget how you phrased it a couple of minutes ago. But
yeah, I forgot how I phrased it, but we've all seen the Obama movie. That's where we're headed.
So, yeah, we have to be very mindful. But again, I thank you, and I will be in touch with you. I will get the links to you, and once you get them, you share them however you'd like.
That I will do, Max. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Same here. All right, take care now.
Yes, bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.